welcome to the Lunch and Learn. I'm really pleased to be asked. Tanis, thank you. I do love coming to do this, talking to people about anything to do with gardening, but planting in particular is one of my favorites things to talk about. There's a whole bunch of history that goes with it, and I try to stay out of that category of it because I think there's folks that do different components of who we are and what we do, and if we all do our own component of that really well, then it works out better. You get that information and you don't get bored from listening to the same person, because that would get tiresome. I think the best talk I've ever done actually was with Taylor. We talked about strawberries. So it was a really good combination of cultural, historical things and the up-to-date aspects of things, as well as how we would have used them. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to apologize if I do, because I just very nearly smacked that that mic that's down there. I'm going to start by handing you a picture, and it's oh, you've got an odd one. I'm going to give you this one because it actually has a fun thing at the bottom. I'm not sure how this works out because now some don't have them. Just pass them around. This is where it begins. When we talk about planting, we can have all the great soil in the world. We can have the perfect amount of water. We can have all of those things, but if you don't have a good seed to start off with, you're not going to be able to grow anything. So some plants do self-plant, so they'll grow and the seeds will fall and that plant will restart in the spring. It will be a whole new plant. Some plants restart from a corm or a root, or they'll just die back a bit, and it's always difficult to say. It'll depend on where you are. If you're very close to the river, there are certain things like you could leave your herbs out, for example. But if it's a really bad winter and the land pulls a lot of the moisture up, then those won't survive. They won't come back up. Rosemary in this area, even though it's considered a perennial, you have to take it out of the ground. And I'm going to just do a little touch on the herb things. So rosemary, if you plant it in your garden or have it outside, it has to come in for the winter. It's much too cold, even though it's a perennial. And north of New York, they call them soft perennials because they can't winter over up here. So there's a lot of things that do that. But in the same breath, there's things that can winter over here that will just go to seed in the south. Kale, Swiss chard, the late spinaches, those kind of greens. And if you're really tricky and you have your kale and your Swiss chard kind of planted together, you can build like tunnels over them with straw bales, and so you can go out and pick kale and Swiss chard, and carrots can be in there. You can pick them all winter long, even here. So if it seems so odd because they're not getting any light. There's like that aspect is missing, but they would be hibernating, but they're still edible, and they'll still push leaves out if they aren't frozen. So it's kind of cool. And if you get a nice big crop going in there and you put your bales so that it goes like this and then a bale on top so it's covered, then you'll still be able to eat them, which is kind of neat. And it's nice because carrots don't store so well unless you have perfect conditions. You usually have to store them in sand in cold areas, but they'll keep just fine in the ground if you get straw around it. So I just wanted to get some of that stuff out. I've got some beans here. And maybe Tanis was thoughtful enough to give me some sticky notepads. We had to shuffle them. We have too many goodies on the table already. I'm just going to hand you the beans so that you can examine them as well. To match up with the picture. I don't want you to look at the picture and think, oh my goodness, we have to learn all these great words. I just want you to look at that picture of the bean, look at the bean in your hand, and understand one key thing that you have to remember, and this is how you will always plant seeds that are good. That's fine. Inside of every seed, and if you look at the bean that you have, look for the line on the side of it. where it was pulled from the pod. See if you can find that little line. So that little line is straight from where it's attached in the pod. That little tiny line is this part of the bean right here. Okay, so you see that? So that's where it's attached to it. I could use all of these fancy words, but there's no need. What you literally need to know about your seeds is this. Inside every seed, there's a baby. There's a baby plant. And if your seed is damaged in any way, so if you're going through your seeds and their seed is broken in half, chances are that baby is not very well. So that would not be a seed that was going to grow. These are a runaway seed. I usually, when I'm doing this class with small children, we take it apart and they literally look for, it's a small line. You actually see that little baby plant in there. That's the plant that comes out. If your seeds get wet and they dry out and you think that they're okay, this is what happens. The seed is wet, that little baby gets the moisture, says, oh, time to wake up, and comes out, and there's no soil and no more water after that, and he's out and there's nothing for him to eat, and that little baby plant doesn't survive. This is usually where the kids all go. So if you can remember that about your seeds, you will know to look at every seed that you're going to plant, make sure it's whole, make sure that it doesn't have cracks in it, that bits of it aren't missing. When we did seeds, for example, corn, when we were going to save seeds for corn, we would save the seeds in the very center of the cob. So this end and this end would literally be for eating and having on hand. On the corn cob, the seeds that run from the center are, number one, the biggest. They look the nicest. They have the most robust health. So we knew, even a long, long time ago, to use the best of the best seeds in order to get the best of the best plants, to then continue on that process. So we knew all about that. And this seems pretty simple and straightforward, but if you know these basic things, the rest of it will come. Okay, so the rest of it will come. But I'm going to get serious and talk to you about other things about planting. So I always like to tell people there's a rhythm to planting. In January, you walk out to where you're going to plant, to your garden, and you look at it, and that's really all you do. You don't mess with your garden in January. January is called the month of dreaming for gardeners. That's where you're thinking of, what am I going to grow this year? How is my garden going to be different? How's it going to look? In February, you look at your garden, you still don't do anything with it, but if you're going to have herbs in your garden, you need to start them in February. A rosemary seed, for example, takes 40 days, 38 to 40 days just to germinate. That means just for that seed to crack open and that little baby to come out. 38 to 40 days. That's not even counting it growing. And a rosemary plant needs to be at least 3 inches tall to go into the garden. So I'm just using herbs for examples because I'll get to the vegetable parts of it in a bit. So February is when you start your herbs. 3rd week, somewhere in there, you start your herbs. When March comes and the weather's starting to change, although we couldn't really get that this year, we had a lot of snow and stuff, you actually can go out to your garden in the later part of March and start cleaning out the debris. The big sticks, don't touch the soil still, take out the debris. I don't take the leaves out, but branches, garbage, things that have, blown along there. And then that's all you do. And you still only look at it and you still only dream. But April will come, and now we have April, and we all get excited because any time now our garden's going to go in, and you go to your garden and you still only look at it. I'm impressing this on people because I have so many people that come to me that lose their garden a couple of times before the season gets started because they're over anxious. You can't really put anything in the garden, and there's a really good way to know because the weather does change. If you want to know if it's a good time to put things in your early seeds, your peas, and because sometimes they can go in at the end of April. The way to test is to dig a hole about that deep about that big around. Push up your sleeve, put your fist into that hole, push the soil all around it, and then sit there for a second. If you immediately start to feel cold, your hand starts to feel cold right away, it's too cold for your seeds. There's too much dampness and coldness in the ground. And it's the strangest type of cold that seeps into your hand. You'll have to just try it. You'll have to do it, and then when it comes time to actually plant, do it again, because there'll be a whole difference. There can be a difference of like almost 30 or 40 degrees in the soil temperatures for it going to test it. So we've gotten through there, and now finally, hurrah, May has come. It's time for us to put our gardens in. I don't go over the times when you should plant things indoors, because I'm trying to reteach people to plant in their garden. We've become a society of instant gratification, right? Okay, it's May 24, I'm gonna put my garden in, rush over to Canadian Tire or one of their stores and buy me some plants and put it in, and then you stand there and go, my garden's in, and it's completely finished. There's none of the pleasures of watching your seedlings come up. There's none of the pleasure of making sure that there's no weeds around them, none of the work that goes into it. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying that there's a profound difference between starting your plants themselves by yourself and picking them up at a nursery or something. So when I was growing up, and we were just having this discussion, the first time there's a picture of me in the garden, I couldn't walk yet. I was too little. I was just a wee babe. There's an old black and white picture. Yes, they're black and white. There's an old black and white picture of me sitting kind of propped up in the garden. So being propped up meant I didn't stay sitting up on my own still. So I've been doing this for a long time. But as I grew older and I came to realize, especially now because we do grow them in the greenhouse, gardens weren't done like that. So that's why I don't usually go over it unless you're specifically in a class for it. Every single thing went into the ground as a seed. Everything. So when you were done and you stood back and when the garden was done, you weren't looking at a sea of plants. You were looking at a beautiful patch of ground, all worked up, and some sticks and string. You're like, and my mom used to feel, you could just see that pleasure on her face when the garden was in, right? That planting had happened, and we're just like, yeah. And we walk away as kids, like, so there's some sticks in there and a bit of string here and there where you want to make sure you know where the row is. The satisfaction that I see on her face, you don't really get that when you put plants in. So I do have information for that if you want it, but I'm suggesting that people plant directly in the ground. The exception to that rule around here, because I've tried it a couple times, is peppers. We've tried to do green peppers, red peppers. Well, technically a red pepper is a green pepper that's ripened. And there is a yellow Hungarian pepper that's sweet as well. If you don't at least start them indoors, and you would do that at the beginning of April. So if you're doing any kind of peppers in your garden, do it then. If you want tomatoes really quick, plant a couple of tiny tim plants indoors and put them in the ground. They'll go crazy while you're waiting for your big tomatoes to come. So, planting. So I'm going to go back to my list. They were making fun of me because I was pulling all these sheets out, and they're like, "What are you going to do with those?" I'm like, "I'm going to read from these." And I put down 10 reasons why your seeds won't germinate. Why, if you put them in the ground, or whether you're planting them indoors or you're planting them directly in the garden. The very first reason that I always come up with is the temperature is too low, it's too cold. That's why I talk about people putting their hand in that, testing that ground. Or if you're planting them, May 2-4 weekend, if you are totally excited to plant Swiss chard, plant spinach, plant peas and sweet peas, you can plant onions from seed, Not a lot of other things I would take the chance with. Don't put any plants in the ground May 2-4 weekend. The last 3 years will be 4 years. 4 years. We've had a hard frost after that weekend. 2 years ago, I'm going to say I probably had maybe 30 people come and have to repurchase their plants because they put them out on May 2-4 weekend, which was something we just did. That was the time to do it, right? And I could do a whole other class on planting by the moon, so you would follow that. And if you do look at the moons, it tells you not to do it. The way the weather has changed and how things have changed with the atmosphere and all of that. The moons are telling us that things are changing. It's just we have to look for it, right? So I just stick with the day thing. Don't plant plants on May 2-4. The list of seeds that I said to you are they're fine to go in. Everyone thinks it's okay to put beans in there, but lovely little beans. They're kind of sucky babies. They don't like to get cold. They're real funny. They'll take the moisture on, but if it's cold, they're like, oh, I can't do this. Too much. Just get away here and rot. Most times when people don't get their beans to come up that's what's happened. The bean got cold and just gave up. It literally got the moisture in it to start that baby coming out, and it just gave up. I didn't wear a fur coat. I'm not ready for this. So, and beans know enough. If they drop the bean themselves, the bean won't crack open. It won't take on moisture until it's warm enough to do it. The heat heats the bean that creates the cracks that allows the moisture in. So the plants know. We just have to pay attention to them. They're telling us what it is we should be doing. So I recommend to people now to wait till the first weekend of June. The last the last hard frost we had last year was June the 2nd. So the first weekend of June is when I recommend that you can start putting your plants in. You can have those other seeds I suggested, but you can put plants in then.
Say that list one more time. Sorry, Kitty. Spinach, Swiss chard, sweet peas. I'm not really real fast.
Okay, spinach, Swiss chard, kale is another one. Peas, onions if you're doing them from seed. I'll tell you a secret about garlic. Garlic used to be only planted in the fall. If you wanted garlic, you had to plant it in the fall, mulch it over, and wait for the winter, Oh my goodness, there's a farmer that's come up with this awesome plan. So he cold storages the garlic, and then in the beginning of March, puts them into pots. They come up, he puts them in the ground. You still get a harvest in June. It's like, I'm sure nature's going to retaliate, but at the top, for now, I'm happy to do it. I mean,
How long's it gonna sit in the fridge?
If you refrigerate, like you can just, if you have the space for it in there, just until you're ready to put it in pots. Yeah, we just keep ours in a space that's cold. Like everyone's got that one cold corner in their house or that one cold spot. It can't get light either. It has to be in something that's dark. So in a cardboard box, somewhere how light's not going to get on. But then because if you missed your garlic planting in the fall, then you can do it in the spring by that tricky, devious method. And it's an old farmer. And this is going to sound awful. I don't very often take advice from new farmers, and I'm trying to change that because I'm like, are you sure? And until they say, well, my grandpa, and then I'm in. But if they're coming up with new ideas that science has given them, I'm really reluctant to take them. They did all of those alterations to all the plants. There are plants out there still that you cannot grow from seed because they bred them to be sterile. So if you are going to plant, try using, for sure, seeds that you know are heirloom or heritage or organic. And the difference between heirloom and heritage is one has a story and one doesn't. One is like, these were my great-great-grandma's beans, and the other one is they open-pollinated these in a field, or, that's the difference. And how many years it takes. A seed has to be from a family of plants of that type that were open-pollinated, which means grown in the ground, outdoors, not indoors, for a minimum of 40 years. And then they can fit into that heritage heirloom category. But yeah, so there's a new type of seed out there, and watch for them. Really, they're called vintage. So they come in these beautiful packages, and you get 6 beans for $10. They're so amazingly just a gaff. It's just really a scam. There's no such thing as a vintage bean. It's okay, vintage bean. That would mean the bean has to be 100. I mean, I do have some corn now that I'm going to try sprouting. That's 95. Someone brought it to me. It was their great-grandpa's, and it had been stored, and it was from when he was a kid, and they figured out it was between 90 and 95. So I'm going to try it. I'm going to try and sprout them, see if I can grow corn from corn that was 95 years old. Anyway, yeah. Certainly, yes.
What are the rules? I know before, I think it was Rick that had said that you're not supposed to plant corn from other corn within 5 miles.
I was given this story. So if you're going to plant in your garden white corn, you plant your white corn, and the next morning when you get up, say you're going to plant like sweet corn or even flint corn. What you do is you put the seeds into a backpack. You put the backpack on, and you start walking, and then you sleep for the night, and then you wake up in the morning, and that's where you should plant them. So there's the cross-pollination. Corn is just like so easy to cross-pollinate. When they put the white corn in down here on 4th line, there was corn that was down, partway down almost to Highway 6, and they thought it was going to be far enough away. Rick's right, about 5. On one side, on this side, because the wind was prevailing from that side through that summer, the white corn on this side was awesome. The corn on this side had so many sweet corn kernels in it, and some of them had bare space, like everything was like a quarter maybe of the field on that side from where the corn was about less than 5 kilometers away was cross-pollinated. So there was kernels missing. So yeah, you can't. They're very easily cross-pollinated. And I should mention that since that was a really great question. Beans are the same way. If you want to, you can plant a yellow string bean and a green bean side by side, inches apart. They'll grow. They'll only get their own kind of bean on them, yellow. But if you put a green bean in and a climbing bean, that climbing bean is going, hey, y'all want to come over here? And you'll get serious cross-pollination, and those seeds cannot be saved. If you're going to plant climbing beans of any kind, it's fine to plant them together if you only intend to eat them. Like, go ahead and not right side by side. You get some pretty whack-looking beans when they get cross. And so if you do like say you're someone that loves to have those big wide beans in your soup, like they put in minestrone. Have you ever seen the big wide green bean they put in the minestrone? So if you like those, but if you plant them, for example, like we did skunk beans, someone did the 2, and then they kept telling me about there was something wrong with their beans. There was, instead of being those nice flat pods that you chop up to put into your soups, because you can't eat them, cook them, boil them, just eat them, they're stringy. It kept having these big bumps on them, and they couldn't figure out what the bumps were, so they brought them in, we opened them up, and inside this beautiful flat green bean was these little skunk beans, black and white beans. So they had no business being inside of that bean pod at all. So yeah, so any kind of bush bean, and bush beans actually take up less space. They don't mind being planted together. Any kind of bush bean you can grow together in the same garden. But like I said, if you're going to grow any kind of climber, just make sure you only eat them. Don't save the seeds, because it's not going to work out. They either won't grow, or it might even be a plant that doesn't produce flowers, or it might produce something but you don't know what it is, some odd stringy looking funny thing. So
So is climbing the same pole?
yeah, so like a pole bean, yeah. If you put in, like, if the Kentucky Wonders, or like those beans that the pole beans, I did pole beans when my kids were little and I didn't know, so I put in like 40 plants, and then you have to put up these sticks and put up the string. We after we sell them, I don't know, I probably have like, I'm going to say easily 150 pounds of beans, because I was unaware of how many beans they produced. When they first get their first few beans, I always pick a handful. Because the minute you pick a handful, just like the baby plant is inside of every seed, if you force a plant to feel like it's being attacked or in trouble, it will produce more flowers to produce more seeds. Because every single plant, doesn't matter what kind of plant it is, it has just one job, and that job is to reproduce itself. The plant knows that's what it's supposed to do. The reason, and I've shown this experiment to a number of different groups. Someone planted corn, sweet corn, in a plug tray. So a plug tray is about that big. It holds about 3 tablespoons of soil. So they put their sweet corn seeds into the plug trays. So there's 72 of them. The corn grew, but they didn't take them out of those plug trays. They just left them because they didn't get quite as far in gardening as they'd hoped. But they brought them to me in hopes that I could use them. And they were about that tall. They had gotten the tassel on the top. Some of them had actually even gotten little cobs about that long. But when we peeled those little tiny cobs open, those inch and a half long cobs, there would be one seed, one kernel of corn. But it was normal size. So that plant knew that it couldn't produce a 6-foot corn plant because there was not going to be enough food and water. But its job was to reproduce itself. So it produced one perfect seed. It makes a tear in my eye when I think of it, because how amazing that is, right? And there's so many things that we did as a people to help all of our situations when we were planting, with the fish, putting fish into the ground. And you can still do that. I still recommend to people to use a fish slurry in their garden as a food, as a base. You just mash up fish with a blender and you just dig a hole. If you're doing a mound garden especially, that extra food is really good. The beans in the mound itself, the corn is in the center, the beans are around it. It's the 3 sisters, and then of course the middle sister, the squash at the bottom. I do a great story with kids where everybody's standing up and being all of the different parts of the thing, but the mound is where I usually spend the most time talking about the soil. They asked me to talk about planting today, so I'm kind of not going to get into that because that's a whole day's worth. I love talking about soil. I could do a whole thing on soil, and we test it with purple cabbage, and we have vinegar. It's a whole science experiment. It's my favorite day. So yeah, doing those kind of things, but going back to that one perfect kernel of corn, how astounding and amazing nature is. And that's where I come to the part of gardening that I think is the most important, is you remembering your spot in that planting part of it, right? Everyone will do things the way they do, and it's kind of fun. I go and help my friend plant her garden, and I light tobacco, and she bows her head and prays. So in a way, we are doing exactly the same thing. And I think there's quite a beautiful aspect of the juxtaposition of the two things that we're doing together. So we only have about 10 more minutes left. I'm going to try and maybe answer questions if you have any. I do have some papers if anybody wants to get copies of them. There's a couple of, yeah, see, I brought too much stuff. Let's finish with why your seeds won't germinate, since that's what we're talking about planting. So it's too cold or it's too hot. Your seeds have been stored in too hot of an environment. They were left out in the sun. They were stored in a cabinet that sealed. Don't store your seeds in plastic, please. That's If you want, there are some seeds there, they've got seeds packaged up for you, but you're better off to just use a piece of paper. Sticky notes are everywhere. Everybody's house I go into has sticky notes in them. And it's really easy to make seed packages with them because you can just fold them up. Fold them in. You don't even need tape. This can happen in an emergency. As in, you're at your neighbor's house and they have some seeds on one of their plants and you want them.
Or not even your neighbor, somebody you don't even know.
That's right. And then you just make a little, it makes a little pouch right there, you drop them in, and the sticky note, blessed heart, its heart does the sealing for you, and nothing gets out. Just like that. This is better than a plastic, any kind of piece of plastic. What happens with plastic is, and I know you've all seen it, and it can happen a little bit with glass too. If something is in plastic and it sits in the sun, what happens? It creates condensation. That drop of moisture drops on your baby bean, and what happens to the baby inside? Yes, and he comes out, and then you may not even know that happened. So you'll have this beautiful bag of seeds, and they look great because you won't see that baby. It will just have awoken to come out. The beans will dry back out, and the baby will dry back out with that. So, yeah. So you're always better to find some kind of piece of paper. I'm notorious for having tissues and paper towels and stuff in my pocket with seeds in it from somewhere. I would love to come back and talk to you guys about doing transplants and cuttings and stuff, because that's another really great way to get stuff. Right now I have a massive rosemary plant in the greenhouse, and I would love for all of you guys to come down and take some cuttings. A softwood or hardwood cutting off a rosemary plant, it's so easy. You just literally cut it and poke it in the ground. So anyway, another reason that your seeds might not germinate is the soil is not too dry. And that seems like pretty obvious, but people are of two venues. I actually teach a whole class just on watering. They either apply a great deal too much water too often, or they're stingy with it. Psst, looks wet, I'm done. Or just drowns it till the water is pouring out. A seed will not germinate, number one, if it's too dry. It will also drown. Literally, that baby will come out into the ground before it can ever push itself out of the ground. It will go and drown. Dead baby plant. There is a little pattern for how deep to plant seeds. So if the seed is small and flat, pepper seed, tomato seed, look at the tip of your fingernail. How much of your fingernail that you can see, right? Depends on, I get mine done so that when I can go and teach, I don't look like a ragamuffin. These are actually my nails, they just coat them. But that's how deep that seed. So like 1/8 of an inch. If you get bigger than that, say morning glory seed, maybe 1/4 of an inch. These guys right here, they have a habit of pushing up and down. So bend your finger, and right there on that line right there where your finger lines up on your, that's how far a bean should go in. Okay, corn, the first bend of your finger, right? And then because seeds will give up if they're planted too deep. They'll struggle as hard as they can, but after a while they can only push so much. I mean, be like us standing in a pile of soil as well. After 20 feet, we're like, I'm not doing this anymore. And that's what the seeds do. Beans, however, are kind of ruckusy, and it would be lovely to watch a time release of it, because they push down with their roots and push up with their plant. And sometimes when you plant beans, if they're too close to the top, they'll pop out of the ground, and then they won't do very well. So that's why you want to do that planting. That's how deep right there, because beans need that. They like to work. They're sort of, they like to have to fight their way out. One of the most common difficulties around here with seeds, when they're put in the ground, you haven't taken the time to amend your soil properly. So clay, rejoice if you have clay. It is the most perfect pH for planting in, right? The Creator has such a great idea. Clay is perfect. It's a perfect 7. It's the best soil to grow in, but it's so dense that plants can't do it. And sometimes when you put seeds into the soil and it's too compacted, they literally just can't. They have to move. They're actually moving to get out. So amending your soil means adding to it. I've had people tell me that it was recommended to them to add peat to their soil. Don't add peat to your soil. In Mexico, they make bricks out of clay and peat, so I don't think that changes when they get up here. Don't add straight peat to your clay soil. It'll turn to a concrete block. Yeah, no, you're better off to add sand and leaves and that kind of thing, things that will break down. We sometimes get this problem. I haven't seen it a lot, but we sometimes get that problem around here in areas that lie low. You'll get a fungus on the ground. You'll plant your plants, you'll put the seeds in the ground. They sometimes will come up or won't, but the ground will start to get sort of a green algae looking affair on it. And that's has to do with the fact that we're close to the river, number one, but also because of the clay will get compacted. If you step into your garden when the garden, that's why I say stay and just look at it. You know, don't go in your garden early because you're making compacted spots in there. You want it to be aerated, so you leave it and you don't work it up until the end of May. Where you step, you're creating a depression, and that depression will gather water, and it's compacted and it's smooth, and you'll get that either moss or algae will grow in that spot. If you're bringing plants in from somewhere else, there's every possibility that those particular pots may have had something on them. If someone brings me pots, we've had a couple of instances in the greenhouse where someone very lovely, good thinking, good-hearted, brought us plants that they had extra of, but they brought with them the critters. So we got either little white flies or aphids or something like that. So that's most often from the pot itself. A moth may come, make a nest on them. So check the pots when you bring them in. And if you're planting your seeds in pots that you had previously, wash them in hot, or it can be cold, but hot soapy water. Dish soap is the only thing to use. And then rinse them in water. So like maybe 2 or 3 gallons of cold water that has white vinegar in it. So if you do 4 gallons of water, do a cup full of white vinegar. And that'll kill any of the bacterias and that kind of thing that are on it. We have about 3 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? It's good to see you. Does anyone have any quick questions about anything we talked about or even something else? Blight. Tomato particular, and you're thinking leaf blight, plant blight. What are you looking at?
All over the tomatoes.
So the tomatoes have black on them? Is it mostly on the bottom?
I don't know, like dry looking, yeah, that stuff to be gone.
Okay, tomatoes have this thing where they need a drink quite often, and about once every 8-10 days they need what they call a deep water drink. So the bottom of your tomato will get that black blight on it or those curls in it if it's not getting a deep water drink. Everybody waters and thinks that, well, they check an inch down, there's water, that's fine. But tomatoes are fond of their water getting to the bottom of their roots. So like once every 10 days at least, just soak the ground around them. You only have to do it a couple times a month and they would be totally happy. It's actually called blossom end rot when that happens, that particular thing on tomatoes, but that's what it's literally from. They're not getting that deep water to their roots. Tomatoes don't need a lot because they just need their stem to be in good shape. The branches can be broken. You can tear all the leaves off but 7. You'll still get a good crop of tomatoes. And they just need their stem to be good and their roots to get a good drink. Okay? Anything else? I'm sure there's a bazillion things everyone could think of. When I walk away, they're all going, oh, I should have asked her about that. Write it down. Yeah, we'll do it. Maybe we'll get together again. So I hope you got a little bit of information out of this. It was useful and a bit interesting. Like I said, I'm usually around if you have questions. If you want to, Tanis has my phone number. I won't put it on a video. Seemed wrong. But anyway, thank you for inviting me. Yes?
What do you think of the black soil that you can buy from, like the big bags of soil? Not from the store, like the big, the yellow bags.
Oh, that's different, because those are from a field. You're not getting topsoil, even though they say you are. It looks like topsoil because the grasses produce that. Topsoil literally is only the very bit of the top. The guys that are doing the sod that actually produce that, because it comes off of the sod that they roll and stuff, that's where those big bags of soil come from. I don't know if the same gentleman is there, but he was pretty consistent about making sure that the ground was fed. I think if you're just starting out, just going to put a garden in, and that's why you're thinking of getting them, you're better off to do a lasagna garden. I thought you were talking about those little bags of soil they get in the store. Did you know that they sterilize that soil? They steam it. The small bags in the stores, but the big bags, if you are just totally set on, say you're doing a raised bed, and it's totally set on getting that soil, I'm not going to argue against it, because my whole thing is I want, in order for us to be sovereign, we must be sustainable, because those two words are intrinsically involved together. So I want us to grow our own food. And I tell people all the time, even if all you do is grow one thing, if all you do is take an onion and, it started to grow in the winter, and you put it in a coffee cup with a bit of water in the bottom, and all you do is use those green cuttings off in your salads in the winter, you're at least in some way, providing food for yourself. And I think that's what we need to do. The other thing that I'm going to admonish you to do, and I've started doing this with all my groups, if you do decide to put in a garden, I'm going to ask you please to bring a friend or two over that doesn't garden and help them to learn the joy of it. There's two things that happen that are missing from our community. We're not growing our own food, and we're not getting together. And that's missing, and that's what I think gardening will bring us back to.
Gardening's a lot of work.
It is, right? And you know how nice it would be to have a couple friends over to weed together, and you just give them a few tomatoes, right? Or feed them a little light lunch. That would be really fun.
Come work on your tan.
Yeah, right? And it's just that companionship too, and I think that's what's missing. We're missing our connections, because we did all of that together. We planted together, and we harvested together, and we ate together, and I think that's where our strength has gone. So thanks so much for listening, everyone.